Hi, everyone. Today I'm joined by Jakub Ferencik. He's a very intelligent fellow, and we dive into a couple of very interesting topics, ranging from cancel culture to religion to free will and determinism, and probably some more as well. So, I'm not going to take up too much time doing a preamble. Here's the episode. Hi, everyone. Today I'm joined by Jakub Ferencik. I want to allow him to introduce himself, so go ahead.
Hey, it's a pleasure to be here. As was mentioned, Jacob, my name is Jakub Ferencik. Originally, I come from Slovakia, moved to Canada at a young age, and we moved back to Slovakia, kind of to and fro. And currently studying at UBCO, philosophy major. Um, and my interests are really specifically ethics, in philosophy, kind of values, Judeo-Christian values, what they are, how they work. And that probably, to make a long story short, comes from my kind of experience from living in Oxford when I was about 18, 19. I moved to Oxford, stayed there for almost 2 years, something over 2 years, and really kind of saw this culture shock of different views and living with 15 people from different parts of the world, America, Australia, Spain, all over the place, and just really leaving my Christian bubble from within Slovakia, where, if people are not familiar, quite a socially conservative Christian world, majority Roman Catholic actually. And so obviously not a lot of experience with differing views because of the majority religious inclinations. And so when I kind of encountered that, I started questioning these things. And then one thing led to another. I moved back to Canada of my own volition and kind of was considering what to study. I was originally studying forensic psychology in England, in Portsmouth, actually, South Coast England. And just for a semester, though, quickly realized it wasn't for me. And I went to Canada, kind of thought about what I like. Philosophy actually seemed quite boring and intimidating. And however, one thing, you take classes at college, university, and you realize, some of these questions naturally, they come to all of us, questions on meaning, questions on epistemology, which is a branch of philosophy that concerns itself with knowledge, how we have it, what is justified, um, yeah, like what are good justifications for truth claims. So we think about these things naturally, even in political discourse, which is just ubiquitous in many ways in society. And so I started kind of going down that path, and then I kind of got entrenched into more secular as an atheist uh, ideologies. Read a lot on Christianity and atheism, theism in general, the evolution of religion, societally, anthropologically, philosophically, and I kind of realized that people have very strong beliefs, and I was kind of questioning why that is really, where these values come from, and why everyone thinks that their view is the correct one. And then I kind of stumbled upon like this desire to, oh, I have a fresh perspective. I have something that people don't have. I was raised very Christian, wanted to be a theologian, moved around a lot, and realized that this is not just what it is. People with different backgrounds believe as firmly as I do their own persuasions. And so I just realized, maybe I should talk about religion in that way, kind of empathetically, where we should, and I think that this is one of the prime motivations for the book, um, that everyone should talk to the opposition in the way that John Stuart Mill would have them, which is paraphrased, to listen to the other side, always read the other side, because as he said, without that you don't really understand the opposition. You don't even understand your own view without knowing and hearing the opposition. And so I wanted to really bring that to the table with this book, which the title is Up in the Air: Christianity, Atheism, and the Global Problems of the 21st Century. And yeah, hopefully it would be out in September. So that's how I pretty much got to where I am now.
So you definitely have an interesting tale there. I just want to rewind a little bit and ask you more about the Christian bubble you brought up. What was the difference there? What change in perspective did you really encounter when you burst through?
Yeah, yeah, that's a good question actually, because I find that a lot now with my I have obviously a lot of still Christian friends that, still interact with, talk to, disagree with. And what yeah, what changed there, I imagine that what it is that, and I recommend this to all my Christian friends, is that once you leave a bubble, as in you leave your house, you leave, the place you were raised, and you leave the social circles you're in, you realize that our worlds are tiny, they're small, and that, knowledge is very difficult. Things are very convoluted. There's no easy answers. And you have actually in philosophy, maybe you're familiar with, epistemic access is a phrase. You have access to knowledge that you just wouldn't have in a similar way as in, the difference between reading a book on a subject you knew nothing about and then reading that book, um, and you just have that type of experience. And I think that experience especially is such a underestimated category when it comes to belief systems, that you have in Russia currently, you know fans of Putin, and you have, in a lot of these countries, you have in Poland, you have fans of demagogues, right-wing populists, and rural areas in England, uh, a lot of Brexit votes, leaving the EU. And a lot of people, question, how is that possible? What is the, justification? Well, in a way, not all of these people are bigoted, obviously. Not all Trump supporters are bigoted. There's just epistemic access to different experience and knowledge. And sometimes obviously that stuff is ignorance, but sometimes it's something that is hard to understand, almost impossible to understand for someone who is from the urban centers, liberal areas, where, like myself politically, I'm quite left leaning on most social issues, and even issues of fiscal importance, and so yeah, I think that the change, the leaving social circles, the reason I brought it up, is that it's quite transformative. And I think that most people, it's an underestimated category, at least in my circles. And I really recommend it in like challenging your preconceived notions. Yeah.
The point that I would make too is that even aside from a religious circle, it really applies to everything, your political beliefs, whatever category you want to use. Stepping outside of it is extremely advantageous to you because it seems like today it's easy to find people who think differently than you and just attribute the worst motivations. Perhaps they're evil, they want to see the world burn. But as you say, as you step outside of your circles, you kind of get some insights into it, and it might reveal to you that, hey, you know, maybe they're not evil. The world is complicated, and they've arrived at wherever they are now via a series of different twists and turns that you haven't experienced. And just understanding that, it brings humanity back to the discussions, which I feel like is sorely missing today.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, that's one of the themes explored by the cognitive psychologist, self-proclaimed intuitionist Jonathan Haidt, if you're familiar.
Yeah.
He talks about the myth of pure evil, and how, it's really easy, us versus them thinking, obviously, has been repeated throughout most literature. It's really easy to classify someone as, lesser than, because of their beliefs. But in actuality, in the real world, different beliefs are, there's a debate over how much we're really responsible for that, and how much, you and your lucky position, not you specifically, but just, people who have the quote unquote right views, they've just been incredibly lucky to have these views. I mean, if I didn't leave my social bubble at a young age, I doubt that I would have changed my views. It would have taken a lot more, because I was deeply entrenched within them. So I completely agree.
That's a very interesting idea. It seems to put forward a lot of weight on environment, like either broadening it or changing it around, has all these benefits. And it strikes me particularly very strongly when I think about something like Nazi Germany. You talk about people who aren't as lucky. Growing up in an environment like that, where the streets are rife with propaganda, where chaos is pretty much all you know, and you can use any country who's gone through a rough period as an example, even Maoist China. Growing up in an authoritarian regime where you are force fed things, the ideas you accumulate are hardly your fault. And we can agree that they are bad to some extent, revering him as a god. Even in North Korea, the same thing there. The ideas are bad, but to what extent do we want to blame people? So the environment for sure is a factor, but how much of a factor though do you think it is?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, right? That's a big debate. I mean, I'm familiar with some of the literature on it, not too much, but I mean, Steven Pinker touches on it in Blank Slate, and I think that I remember him saying that the consensus, the scientific consensus, is right now pretty much like a 50-50, where environment is important for beliefs, but then also, you know, um, your nature is as well. How you think, genetics, things like liberal people are more creative, conservative people tend to be more organized, things like this. But then I would question it with regard to, as you mentioned, with Mao and these kind of dictatorships where people, or like in Soviet Russia, where people are very aligned. I think that if you have nuance and if you have advocacy of free speech, it tends to be skewed, the mainstream dogma. And I think you saw that with the Enlightenment. You saw it in even with the Reformation. Pluralism of values and difference of belief. So I don't know if there would be a way to be precise on the statistics, but from what I've read, 50-50, and then yeah, a lot of nuances there for sure.
Now I want to talk about your book. Can you talk a little bit more about the ideas you explore in that?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, up in the air, the title there, subtitle is Christianity, Atheism, and the Global Problems of the 21st Century. But the title, up in the air, is just kind of the theme of the book, which is um, nuance. Is the best way to really describe it. That we don't know. A lot of the things we're talking about is just our best guesses. They're inductive, probabilities. They're not set dogma, they're not doctrine. And so that's the beauty of it, though, is precisely in that the beauty of debate is that we don't know, and that we're talking and sharing, expressing ideas for the sake of ideas. And that's why a lot of this stuff should be. I'm a big advocate of free speech, as you are as well, from what I've gathered. And the yeah, like it's just much more effective for society to prevent taboos. And so the idea behind the book is that it's up in the air, that we shouldn't be quick to judgment. We should urge slow thinking, promoted originally by Daniel Kahneman, I believe, along with his colleague, who won a Nobel Prize, I believe, in economics, behavioral economics. He wrote slow slow and fast thinking, slow fast thinking, a book in the, I believe it was the 70s, and since then it's been regurgitated. This idea that we need to be slow, we need to practice um, careful thinking, and we need to prevent snap judgments, and that is the idea behind the book. There's three parts to it, which are um, I'll get into that a little bit. The fundamentals, first part, where I talk about reasoning, or as Susan Jacoby, one writer, calls it, age of unreason, the age of unreason that we're entering in to, which is kind of this age where a lot of people are consuming media that's very snappy, quick, grabs your attention, clickbait articles, TikTok videos, got to be 20 seconds, 240 characters, whatever it is on Twitter. And we're reading less, something like one nonfiction book a year per American adult. And that could be traced kind of within all of society. And so the fundamentalist part of the book, reasoning and morality, is kind of touching on, if we can grasp this, do Christians, do atheists have good ways of thinking rationally? Can they think rationally? is what kind of the question I propose. Can they justify thinking, and and then can they justify moral thinking or moral reasoning, moral acting? And my answer to both of these questions, the kind of the perspective I take in the book, is that each chapter does attempts to justify the position. So in the Christian chapter, I have chapters both on the Christian and the atheist position on every chapter throughout the book. And this is kind of a view in philosophy that an American philosopher, Davidson, talks about. John Stuart Mill talked about it as well, which is you want to present an argument in a way that the opposition would agree with, rather, and then dismantle it. So that's kind of the position I take in the book, where first I justify reasoning from the Christian position, where biblically slash historically has Christianity failed, and where have they actually prevailed and been better than others. So I kind of look at that and attempt to quote unquote steel man, opposite of straw man, the arguments, and then I do the same with reasoning, and I just kind of I allow the reader to decide. It's up in the air, you know. I don't want to dictate things. I obviously have a position in the book, but it's less kind of in your face. And so that's the first part, our fundamentals.
I agree that things are fundamentally, for the most part, up in the air. How do you square that though with something like moral relativism, especially when it gets pushed all the way to the extreme where literally everything is up in the air? There really isn't a right or wrong. It depends on how you can reason through things.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, that is specifically you see it in philosophy classrooms a lot, and also just in the mainstream, with you had it a lot in the 70s. You know, this concern over postmodernism, moral relativism. You have a lot of thinkers today, public intellectuals, talking about that as well. I'm concerned as well. I do think that there's a place for it to say that complete ambiguity is nonsense. But along with that, I think there's the risk of completely discrediting subjective and intuition. And I think that a lot of the time with you know, morality, for example, there's a lot more disagreement than there is disagreement intuitively. As in, you surely do have your fair share of bad apples there, where you know they take these arguments to the extreme, where they hear that there is such a thing as subjective, so therefore rapists, quote unquote, are justified. You know, that's something that I would say that that is problematic in so many ways, and quite an exception to the rule of this type of thinking that I'm promoting, which is, you know, that nuance is really important, and that there is consensus. Yeah, so I think it's a really big, difficult question, but I wouldn't. I would say that moral relativism it kind of is on a spectrum where you have complete moral ambivalence and moral relativism, and then you have on the opposite spectrum you have complete moral doctrine or complete dictating of behavior. And really, I think everyone's kind of in this middle area where no one wants to be completely told what to do. Even within religious circles, you have a lot of disagreement on kind of on fundamental and less fundamental views, like trivial views. And within secular society, there's just the law is largely in agreement, and I think that people often make the mistake to suggest that, you know, thinking that nuance is important automatically suggests, you know, apocalypse or apocalyptic times, or kind of the absence of thinking. And I hear it a lot, and I understand the concern, as I said, but I wouldn't be so quick. I think that, as A.C. Grayling, one philosopher that's really influenced me, has said, you really see thinkers and people in general agreeing on a lot. It's because of, you know, as research has shown, that humans have this consistent morality, along with a lot of animals as well. And so this kind of consistency among us, I think, should help us and should make us more optimistic. Yeah.
For sure. And the notion of morality, I feel, is one of the bigger wedges between the religious and the atheist circles. So the argument that I hear a lot is, how do you derive morality as an atheist? You know, in the religious sects, they have a text that pretty much outlines what they have to do, what they should uphold, and that gives them a certain understanding of what has to be done, what should be avoided, and that aligns with what you're saying about the spectrum there. On one side, you have something codified, the maxims and the dogmas telling you exactly what has to happen. How would you answer that inquiry? Where would the atheist find these things from?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you touched on like kind of the crux of the issue for the atheist, which is that we don't have dogma, and so therefore there's a lot of um, humanist freedom. And Sartre talked about this back in the day, that along with that, the biggest curse is really freedom, because you are on the one hand given so much, but then also given so little. And yeah, for myself, I think that one of the things that we should do better at as atheists, people who don't have a God that unites them, is to purposefully educate and almost form communities, small communities of close circles of friends that would share either stories or kind of philosophy, literature on how to behave better, how to be better citizens, how to care better for your neighbor, things that on almost bi-weekly Christians and other religious citizens think of. They are reminded, love your neighbor, do this. And there's obviously argument over how efficient they are and how good they are and how good it is to be reminded every week, and whether really you just start kind of being lukewarm, quote unquote. And I think that, yeah, this is one of the things that we're failing at as atheists. There are communities. There's this Harvard-based community, Voluntary Simplicity, VS, which stress kind of minimalistic lifestyles and donating a lot and eating kind of more mindfully. And then you have Effective Altruists, another group that was originally based in philosophy circles with like Peter Singer, whom I'm sure you know, William McCaskill, Toby Ord. Effective Altruists, effectively, they give huge percentages of their incomes to effective charities that fight, for example, preventable diseases such as pneumonia, diarrhea, and malaria, which are very cheap, cost effective to get rid of. And they sacrifice a lot to their personal lives and well-being, such as not owning cars, not spending a lot on vacations. So you have secular, obviously, organizations that stress moral living and virtuousness of character, but it's not on the mainstream. And honestly, no one really knows of these, at least very few. It's not at all public. So I think we need to do better there. There's a lot of space for improvement.
Once a secular community develops for itself some type of guideline on how you should go about living, what really is the difference now between that and religious living? Is it just the deity? That seems to be the only difference to me. And if that's it, there's a lot more in common now than once believed before.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing, that like our intuitions are really connected, and you don't need a set of doctrines to tell you that stealing and lying and murdering is wrong. Pretty much people agree that, extreme lying is actually quite bad. You shouldn't be lying, at courts and at in front of judges, tribunals. Like, lying is very much frowned upon, illegal even. And even in the home settings, parents kind of, at least if they're doing their jobs, like instill this within kids. And then within friendships, integrity is really what keeps friendships going, and people hate being lonely. So there's huge societal punishments that we've built up just because of, kin relations. And so, yeah, like that, there's that argument there, that like really the relevance of religion, we're losing some of it. Yeah, so that was the first section. So the second section is our priorities, and that is the global problems from the subtitle, which is the 21st century, as with the 20th century, is going to have a lot happen in it, and with technology, we're going to have a lot of bad stuff happen. And so it's kind of looking at the discussion of what is of importance, or what we should focus on, and and I look at some of those topics as not exhaustive. People could have done better jobs and could have been more descriptive on a number of these issues. But I do my best, and I talk about human rights, number one, and I'll talk a little bit about each one, if I may, here, just to justify why I include them in the book. So, human rights, number one, both from the Christian and the atheist position, which is how do they justify focusing on human rights with the number of climate migrants that we're going to have in this 21st century, with the number of genocides that are occurring right now, with the Kurds, with the Rohingya, and so many more, with the Uyghur Muslims right now, and we can expect a lot more to happen actually. And so then I look at those and I say that there's going to be millions. Some estimates really are for climate migrants are within the hundreds of millions. Even some I forget by which organization, but it was one of these United Nations uh, organizations. Some estimates are even up to the billion. And so with climate migration specifically, so we're going to have a big issue. And with right-wing populists occupying a lot of the borders in Europe, in Hungary, even in Greece now, in Poland, now with Boris Johnson in England. You have Finnish parties as well, German parties that are extremist right-wing neo-Nazi parties. Obviously, Eastern Europe is quite crippled by it in recent years, but even in the past. There's real concern over how much we're going to accept and whether immigration is at all tenable, and so this is something I touch on in the book, and then after human rights, I look at animal rights. I kind of do the same thing. I do factory farming. I look at man-made climate change, specifically how that affects people and whether Christians can focus on man-made climate change or whether atheists. And really it's saying who can do a better job, but once again, up in the air. It's up for you to decide. I'm representing both sides equally, I would say. Although I do say, there are parts where, for example, with animal rights, the Bible does a very poor job at justifying animal protection. You have so many cases: Jesus drowning a flock of pigs, releasing the a legion of demons to them, or rather, a group of demons that are called legion, and Noah's flood, obviously killing animals, unsuspecting animals for a crime they haven't done, namely being sinful. Animals nowhere in the Bible is suggested that that are that they are sinful in any way. That at least with humans, the common objection is that humans have free will, and so therefore there is a justification for punishment. With animals, you can't really make that claim. And I'm kind of say that the atheist really does have a better job there, at least if he is being logical and consistent with you know kind of common sense knowledge, which is sentience really is a determinant for people to treat other people better, and a level of consciousness, which now the consensus in science is that a lot of animals have a basic level of consciousness, obviously different degrees of cognitive tasks and, for example, communication. However, even with animals, you have different dialects, you have different accents with prairie dogs, for example, and you have really consistently, it's been observed that elephants have social lives. They stop and they remember their deceased. They help other animals along with other very developed animals, and so really the understanding there is that Christians will have a difficult time justifying the treatment of animals biblically. They can do it obviously with the help of arguments that are separate from the Bible, namely utilitarian arguments, which are kind of the sentience, happiness for the greatest number of people slash sentient beings, as some philosophers have extended it to, even Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill originally, to an extent. And so yeah, so I'm looking at those.
Would you agree that the comparison might not be exactly fair here? We're taking the Bible and Christianity, which dates back thousands of years, and we're perhaps using modern atheist principles to compare the two. If we would take an atheist, if they existed back in the day, and what they believed and compare that with Christianity, I feel like they both wouldn't be exactly super concerned with the lives of pigs and stuff like that. So I think the environment played a big role there, and this is one of the natural constraints of religion. It can't be updated. So there's no opportunity for us to adapt it now that we are in a position to maybe think a little bit more about animals. What would you say about that? I feel like that would be a common defense here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think there's a couple ways to respond where, well, first and foremost, atheism is quite a new development, as in public, the rejecting of the existence of any god. As in, you would have nomads and, quote unquote crazy prophets back in the day rejecting the existence of gods, or at least being kind of silent on it. You had it with ancient Greek philosophers where it's not entirely clear if Socrates, for example, believed in gods, where like he kind of hints at it in certain texts, in Plato's dialogues, but you don't really know if he truly believed in gods. So there's like some things there where I would say that atheism, because it's so novel, at least in the public eye and kind of widely accepted, that yeah, there's societal reasons for a lot of the beliefs that atheists have. But I think that one of the things is that religion has evolved in many ways where religion evolves along with the society. So, for example, Kenan Malik, I believe that's how you pronounce his name. He's based in London, teaches at one of the unis there. I believe it's University of London. I'd have to double check on that. Don't quote me. But he wrote a wonderful book called The Quest for a Moral Compass. And what he says is, and he makes a compelling argument for it, is that really there are no metaphysical values over society, that you have religion morphing along with social concerns of the day. And so I would say that religion fundamentally does change and it adapts to certain things. That's why you have a lot of socially liberal Christians today accepting homosexuals, where I would say, and along with others, that clearly in the Bible homosexuals are treated unfathomably poorly and inhumanely, unethically, and that you have a lot of people rewording things, looking at things differently, saying that that's outdated, that's not how the Bible meant it, or the writers of the Bible meant it. But in actuality, you can make a really compelling case for homosexuality being indeed a sin within the Word of God. But it's just that people have adopted new norms and social customs today. So I think that religion does change, but obviously, once again, a lot of people who are religious don't take the Bible that seriously. So they won't see the mistreatment of animals within the text as anything worth noting or anything worth putting up issues with, because they just wouldn't take it, as they would say that it's relevant to the day and it was just custom. And that, yeah, as you said, like atheists would, if they were back in the day, which some of them I'm sure were, would treat animals the same way. And you have that, I mean, that argument is played out with regard to a lot of things. For example, anti-Semitism. You have atheists along with religious people, Christians, specifically in Europe, being quite anti-Semitic. With Voltaire, for example, he was definitely anti-Semitic, along with Martin Luther. So, yeah, people are the products of their times, and we're doing a really good job now because we're located in the 21st century. I mean, maybe you can make an argument that animal animal focus and the focus on sentience has been promoted by secular thinkers originally, which is why I would promote in the book the idea that atheists can do a fundamentally better job, such as, I mean, by many, the animal rights liberation movement is considered to have originated in the early 1970s with Peter Singer's book, Animal Liberation. I believe it's 1971 or 1972, somewhere around there. And so, yeah, the focus, I think, is that Christianity focuses on issues, but it's not about these kind of issues. It's not clear why they should focus, even, because animals are, meant to be dominated and subdued in early Genesis, and they're meant to be eaten. That's why God didn't initially create them, but that's what happened after the fall, at least biblically. And so any Christian acting separate from that now is looking past the Bible and is adopting customs that, yeah, as you say, can be the product of society. And so it's not really an issue um, competition necessarily, but it's more of an issue of how can we justify things, and who's going to do a better job at it in the 21st century.
Let's jump to the third section of your book now.
Yeah, so the third section is Our Everything, titled Our Everything, and it is about the meaning of life. And um, so the meaning of life specifically is one of the biggest questions that religion, really one of the reasons why religion, along with the social customs and adopting morality, along with that is just the question of what is the purpose of everything. And in the past, as Thomas Hobbes pointed out, life was very, well, it was nasty, brutish, and short, as he famously proclaimed. um, right now we have, at least in the West, in a lot of places in the world, you have a much more kind of appreciation of art. You have appreciation of life in general, and you have people enjoying life. But then on top of that, you have this kind of outbreak of loneliness, and you have an outbreak of suicide. Depression among teens, arguably because of the wide prevalence of social media, but also just because of, in some way you could say, secularization, the freedom, as I mentioned before, with regard to secular values. You have the 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 poison, along with the healing that can bring. So so I kind of look at that, and I look at whether religion has an answer. Well, specifically Christianity has an answer to the meaning of life, and it does. However, it's not as free as someone who is an atheist. Which, for the atheist, you have the 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 point of freedom. Whereas for the Christian, you have one meaning of life, which is to glorify God. And what is the best way to do that? The best way is to proclaim His gospel to the ends of the earth, to represent the gospel in order to prevent sinners from entering hell. That is the mission. That is the proclamation. And if Christians, disagree, then really you just have to look at the biblical characters. What were they doing? What was Peter doing? What was Paul doing? What was Jesus doing? I mean, Paul, particularly, the triumph of Christianity, as Bart Ehrman, an agnostic scholar, said, is that Paul was such an efficient businessman. Uh, he was adamant about proclaiming the word, to Athens, to the center of knowledge at the time, to Rome, across um, across Israel. So, I think that is how I finish off the book, which is, can atheists, as Christians readily claim, can they have a picture of meaning, and can they justify it?
I highly recommend everyone to check it out when it comes out. You said you
Mm.
expect sometime in September?
September, yeah, yeah.
Well, I'll be looking forward to that.
Thank you.
And I know aside from books, you also do a lot of blog posts, and this is where I want to bring the conversation next, particularly your piece about cancel culture. Can you just highlight what you talked about in that?
Yeah, so anyone who's not been living under a rock knows that recently, especially, you have this outbreak of concern over the prevalence of cancel culture, and how certain voices are being silenced, especially conservative voices. But it works both ways, really. And early on in the 80s, 90s, and even early 2000s, you had the juxtaposition of what is happening now, which is liberal values were silenced. And so that is what the piece is about. It's about the existence of cancel culture, why we should do better as liberals, left leaning individuals, and why we shouldn't silence. So I look at some of those questions. I look at the history. I look at the early feminist suffragist movements, and I talk about social taboos, which is really the fundamental of canceling someone. Is that certain topics, such as homosexuality, in homosexuality in Victorian England was not permitted. Even later on into the 60s, and so it was recently that homosexual marriage was legalized. Atheism in Pakistan and other places in the world is socially taboo. Socially liberal customs in Eastern European countries are taboo, and Russia are taboo. So canceling someone rests on that premise that something is taboo, something is off topic, and so therefore we cannot communicate, and we can't have someone even suggest, as you did in your podcast episode on cancel culture, Terry Crews. You can't have someone suggest that there's problems with a movement such as Black Lives Matter, because that means that you must be bigoted. And I personally don't know about any problems about Black Lives Matter, the movement specifically. I'm open to them, but that is the emphasis of the book, and that is the emphasis I think that we should have in society, which is slow thinking and slowing down, stopping the spread of name calling and outrage. Outrage is definitely justified, and at times it's necessary, but there's too much of it, I think. And understandably, the left is outraged at the fact that people in power right now are so concerned, and are talking the most about cancel culture, people that have the spotlight for so long. And I share that. I understand it, but a lot of people aren't in power and still are silenced, told that they can't have views that maybe aren't the mainstream. And I think that's just something we don't want in a free society. We want to be able to communicate, and I'm sure you agree.
Cancel culture is something of a unique topic. I feel like there are those on the left and the right who do agree it's something to get rid of. It isn't strictly something that resides in one camp or the other, but there's still opposition to it. And as someone who likes free speech, debate, and logic, it's pretty disappointing to me. So, one of the things that we both noticed was AOC, where she seemed to be dismissing the notion of cancel culture in general, trying to downplay it or even not even acknowledge that it even exists. And beyond that, there are those who would fight back and say something like, well, it's something you mentioned too, that we're very concerned about the mind. They regard it as something like a sponge, and exposing the mind to certain ideas is just too risky. It's something that we can't allow to happen, and therefore cancel culture has to be the shield that stops that absorption from going on. And even further than that, there are those who would say something like, well, how do we shield people from being offended? When a conversation happens and there isn't this overarching principle there that shields people from topics that might be taboo or something that might hurt someone's feelings, how is that productive? And they'll levy these type of responses against people who fight against cancel culture. How would you respond to these kind of criticisms?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. The problem is that people think that the mind is a sponge. You put that well. The idea behind cancel culture, another one, is that we absorb things that we're exposed to, and you had this with Holocaust deniers, right? You had this with all sorts of kind of science, history revisionism, and all of that stuff is incredibly harmful and arguably idiotic, because there were something like more than 1,000 concentration camps across Europe, Poland, Ukraine, um, you know, Eastern Europe, so, and even Germany and other places, obviously. And so it's just an undeniable fact, specifically the Nazi Holocaust, and also just the estimates of the the victims, in the 12 millions, you know 5 million Jews or so, and something over 5 million um, Slavs, Poles, uh, deserters, prisoners of war, Ashkenazi Jews, people who don't really look Jewish but are. And so that's the thing, that a lot of these things that are off topic, or are off topic specifically because people view them as something that will be adopted by the majority if they are voiced. And 100%, that is something that people should think about. But these types of doomsday arguments have been played out ad infinitum. They're just so common, and usually the world isn't that simple. People do indeed think, and actually, people who have had, for example, Peter Singer, someone who I mentioned earlier, a Princeton philosopher. He One of the most influential philosophers of our day. He has his own family members who are victims of the Nazi Holocaust, and his family fled to Australia as immigrants during that time, and some of them couldn't get out in time. And he himself is a proponent of free speech. And Noam Chomsky, who is a sincere leftist, um, as you know, he he himself has said that Goebbels was in favor of free speech for the views he liked. Stalin was in favor of free speech for the views he liked. A democracy is being in favor of free speech for the exactly for the views you dislike. And sometimes that's super difficult. I know I've practiced it myself, and it's very difficult to listen to people who opportunists such as Candace Owens, and populists such as Trump, and even on the left, Bernie Sanders is at times difficult to listen to. 100, definitely AOC is difficult to listen to at times, but that it's a different thing to silence and to deplatform philosophers or thinkers, intellectuals, access on campuses just because the mind is quote unquote a sponge. That if you let Ben Shapiro to talk in UC Berkeley, that um, that derogatory speech will become regular. I don't know if it's that simple. Maybe with some, but we don't really know the statistics. And if people do know the statistics, obviously the argument, my view, will change as long with as as much as anyone else's view would change who likes to think slowly about these issues. So I think that we need to just kind of get rid of these taboos, doomsday arguments, and we need to accept debate and free speech.
My intuition just tells me that cancel culture is masquerading as some type of solution to wrong think, but in reality, it isn't doing that, and we should reveal that. So the
Yeah,
situation plays out to me like this: you have someone who has an idea that you find reprehensible. The best way to actually shatter the idea, perhaps change the person's mind, is to talk about it, debate with them, and show them another way of thinking. Once you expose them to just pure reasoning, it might be enough to push them over the edge, or at the very least get them to doubt what they think. But to use this new solution, if it even is that, cancel culture does the opposite. So we won't even engage in the realm of ideas. We'll simply cancel, deplatform, whatever the other person, silence them. But the idea remains intact. And in fact, you might even get them feeling vindicated. You might make them feel like they've been mistreated, that they do have something to say, but you're stopping them from doing so. So they're going to find other ways to get the message out. And this could even further spread the idea, canceling Shapiro at Berkeley. You may have tried to keep his message under wraps, but it did precisely the opposite. This made all the headlines. People who never heard of Shapiro heard of him now. And it's just so counterproductive to what we're really trying to do. The only answer here to me is to take the ideas at face value and debate them in a public forum. Explain to people why they shouldn't take it into account if you have a good reason for thinking so, and trust that people can understand that. Not to feel that they will absorb it instantly, like they have no choice in the matter, but to believe they are reasonable enough to come to a good decision, especially in 2020 in North America. I think we can afford the populace that much grace.
yeah, absolutely. I agree. It's actually concerning that people would question that. People would actually deplatform on the basis of something like that. But you see it a lot, and I think that we need to get rid of it.
And that's the next question, though. How do we actually fix things? This it seems like it's becoming more and more entrenched into our DNA as a society.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, one way to do it is having these conversations, right? And I think that's why we're both fans of Sam Harris, for example, who will have long form conversations with people he disagrees with, at times doing a good job, at times doing a bad job. But just the prevalence of that, seeing them more, normalizing it and making it something that people are hungry for. I think that podcasts are just a fantastic platform to do that because people have leeway, time during the day where they're cooking, during their laundry or biking or exercising, where they have time to kill, attention to use, and they'll probably, hopefully, do it more and more, and podcasts will become something that is just a huge part of everyone's life, across demographics, and so yeah, I think that along with that will come something, hopefully. Although I am an optimist in these ways, so I would be open to some disagreement toward that.
Harris probably is a good segue to the next thing I want to talk about, which is the nature of thoughts. You said a very interesting thing on one of your blogs, which is we can be sure that we do not have full control over our thoughts. And I kind of want you to explain that a little bit more.
Yeah, so that is actually a revelation I had not too long ago, I believe something like a year ago, where along with Harris and a number of these meditators, I've been practicing meditation on and off throughout my later life here, like in my early 20s, and I've noticed something specifically in meditation. However, you can notice it also with the use of psychedelics. I'm sure that you can notice it just without with psychedelics, but some of these substances really allow this kind of opening of the mind and or doors of perception, as Aldous Huxley calls it, or noetic qualities, as I forget his name now, Timothy, one of the big researchers of LSD. I don't know why I'm blanking, but one of the researchers, noetic qualities, or I believe it was Stanislaw Grof. I forget now, but it's kind of these duh moments, quote unquote, where you just notice how things are the mind is open and the mind is fluid and things appear and disappear, not all the time of your own volition. And so I've noticed that on meditation, where attention is something that comes and goes, and you don't really choose. So my some of the premises that I've kind of explored on this are that, for example, imagine going for a walk, and you go for a walk and you're just walking around. It's a nice day, and you see houses, you see trees, you see maybe dogs, people walking their dogs, and you're not really choosing things to think about. Things appear. You're like, oh, why is that person dressed that way? That's a cool look. Or, oh, I forgot to do this at home. And you're not really debating what to think about. You're not really choosing issues to think about. Sometimes you are, like, obviously, but even that, to an extent, is something that you're not choosing, such as, oh, that movie I watched yesterday with some friends, or that book that I was reading today. That was actually an interesting thought. And so I think that that is something in my own thinking I've adopted, where nuance, the subject of the book, is coming in that kind of theme, where we're not choosing what we're thinking about. We're not choosing what we know, and so that kind of comes with thinking about this, and also that comes with the fluidity of personality. We are not choosing what we think about. To an even larger extent, we're not choosing who we like. We're not choosing, who we're in love with that much. And what that argument is really is urging empathy. It's urging some kind of understanding.
There seems to be an opposite effect too. So we don't choose what to think about. We also don't choose what not to think about. Even looking at my desk right now, there is an infinite amount of things that could be attracting my attention and taking away from this conversation. If you were on LSD or something, I'm sure that would happen to you. Even just the minor details of the woodwork here, the pen over there, the mechanisms inside of it. So many things around us could just attract our attention infinitely. And if that was the way we operated normally, nothing would get done. We'd probably be extinct as a species. It seems like the mind has some kind of autopilot here to keep us on task. It's predetermining a couple of things here and there. You won't pay attention to that. You will pay attention to this. How much can we impact that though? Do you think there are things that we can do to better hone that tool?
Yeah, well, I think that one of those tools that we can use is, and I don't know to what extent, but I believe that also reading, really reading, is a type of meditation, in a way, where you are on a page, you notice yourself, as you say, lost in thought. Can't be thinking about anything on the desk. Well, the same with reading. You notice you're halfway through a page, and what was I really reading about? You're kind of lost in thought, yet you're still skimming over words, and so reading is kind of a refocusing, and it's kind of this continuous, oh, I'm lost in thought, oh, I need to come back, in a similar way to mindfulness meditation, Vipassana meditation, which is just paying attention to minor details, such as the breath, or a word, or some kind of qualities of the mind, or um, sensations within the body. And so that's something I think that really helps train the mind. Some people are going to have it worse off than others. ADHD type personalities that they it's very difficult for them to pay attention. But I'm sure that can be trained there, and also long form conversations. I think that anything that really forces you to be present, something that forces you to listen. I think that throughout my life, I've really prized long form conversations with close friends. I think that people should be having that more and more, and anything that really requires your attention. I'm sure that movies, for example, impactful, important movies that require attention to detail, noticing names, that also can help. But I think one of the better things to do is read and meditate, be mindful and pay attention.
This leads me to wonder, where do you stand on the free will versus determinism debate?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That's the necessary connection to the topic. It's I would claim some ignorance in this, in the sense that, like, I've read some of the literature. Obviously, as a philosophy student, it's one of the topics that we talk about. I'm familiar with Harris's view, which is to a large extent deterministic. I would share some of that. I would share, especially this kind of genetic underpinning to a lot of our views. We don't choose what we think. I kind of touched on that earlier. We don't, you know, our personalities we can choose to some extent, but mostly it's our social circles, not even our parents, that influence us, at least not later on. And so I think that a lot of the time, even this thought experiment that Harris proposes, which is, think of a movie, and if I ask you that question, the response is going to be something. To what extent do you choose that? You know, I've thought of Lord of the Rings when I said that. Like, I'm a big fan of the movies. I think that Peter Jackson did a fantastic job. The actors did an amazing job. I'm a product of my upbringing. I'm a product of my social circles. So I wouldn't know statistically on what level, if it's 100%. Some people take that view, and it gets quite technically philosophical at that point. But I would say that it would be quite difficult to propose that we're completely free. I think that's impossible. I think that to a large extent we are, subjects of. But that shouldn't lead to ambivalence. That shouldn't lead to a lack of responsibility. The same way as, for example, sociopaths. Should we punish them in the criminal system because of the lack of free will? These are kind of the arguments, the slippery slope arguments that come up when discussing these things. I think that it's completely justifiable to limit interactions with society if you have sociopathic tendencies, or at least harmful, actively harmful tendencies to other people. Obviously, the death penalty is taking it way too far and is completely misunderstanding the psychology of people and upbringing. So, and I think that people understand that fundamentally now more and more. And I think that, yeah. So I don't know where I would be on the statistical. I wouldn't be 100% because there is some debate. I would say, some good arguments for the free will, because that's where I claim ignorance, that I wouldn't know where I really land. But I would say that it's quite undeniable that to a large extent, if not to ultimate extent, we are we are not responsible. And so therefore that is precisely the reason I think that's up in the air, all the topics, that we shouldn't be that harsh on people. I mean, think about flat earth theories. Who would want to choose that? That is just scientific ignorance, uh, even common sense ignorance at this point. So yeah, I wonder what your views are.
There's points for both sides, but there's also downsides too. So if you're 100% free will, which I think is actually a weaker argument than 100% determinism, you just have
Mhm.
all these issues. Like, as you mentioned, there are things in the background that are going on in the software that we don't account for. And to try and say that you're freely able to do whatever you want, there are no restrictions here, whatever, that's just false. And one of the lessons you can gain from that, if you actually adhere to the ideology of pure free will, is that everything that happens to someone is just because they've made it occur. And the things going on around them didn't really have an impact on that, which is wrong. On the other side, though, if you were really to adhere to everything is determined, 100% determinism, you might find yourself in a place where you have actually entered moral relativism and nothing is anyone's fault because we're all just products of things in the past and whatever, and we haven't
Yeah,
chosen any of this. I do think there's a middle ground to be had here. And some of it's linguistic actually too. When people say free will, I notice that some people mean one thing and other people mean something else entirely. To me,
yeah.
free will is the ability to make choices, and we definitely do have that. The choices, though, are definitely constrained to some extent by things that are predetermined. So, my proclivity to go to the gym, it's definitely not 50-50 either way, it's just my will. There are factors that have played a role in that. Maybe it's me watching a TV commercial that has subconsciously impacted my brain. Maybe there's something genetic that makes someone want to exercise more than others. You can probably relate to just the feeling of not wanting to go out. There are a lot of things that go on there, and the choice might turn out to be 10% versus 90. You're more inclined to do that because of deterministic qualities, but there still exists a choice there. And to me, that's enough to say there is some semblance of free will in our lives. What do you think?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, those parts, it's very difficult. I mean, there's, I think, a difference between the type of choices we make it's really, I don't even know if, I think Harris is on the more deterministic side there, but I think determinists kind of have this linguistic thing where I don't know if they would include some of that, as in like choosing a movie or, and I think that, yeah, there's some way to really promote nuance there where like it's really difficult to say that every action has been predetermined in the sense of like I'm picking my toothbrush. Some of these actions are just we are free to an extent. You know, there's freedom uh, to an extent in a house. There's stuff to do. It's not like you're entering this room because of software or anything like that, or a room in the house. And so, yeah, I think that, yeah, we need to change the linguistic understanding there. And really, it's a difficult conversation to have because of that, because I don't know if there is an answer. I don't know if there is a way to say that, as in the Matrix or something, as in a computer game or movie, everything is a given and that everything is somehow predetermined. Um, yeah, on some very metaphysical level almost. Yeah, it would be difficult to say.
How do you see intuition fitting into the equation here?
Intuition, I think, has I would almost proclaim myself an intuitionist in the sense that a lot of these views have been given to me in some way. A lot of these views I'm not responsible for. When I have conversations with people who are adamant and who say they're always right or contrarian and disagree with most things and say that they have the right view, what comes across to me there is that they don't understand intuition. They don't understand the the the, the kind of ubiquitous nature of it. And I think that, well, for example, Jonathan Haidt talks about this in his book, The Happiness Hypothesis, but also in Righteous Mind: Why Good People Are Divided by Religion and Politics. It's a view that I've really appreciated and I see quite compelling. And it is in Happiness Hypothesis, he proposes that this analogy metaphor of the elephant and the rider, and how we have the elephant who is our intuitions, and we have the rider who is the rational side of the brain, and we're trying to control the elephant. We're not in control. If the elephant wanted to, it would prevail. You have it kind of like these ideas of the monkey mind. It kind of ties in with our previous discussion here about the attention and how ideas flow into the mind, thoughts flow into the mind without our volition. It's closely connected here because intuition reacts on a similar level, and you can see this with, for example, a number of things. Repetition within political discourse, for example, is one of the tactics that is used. So in 2008, with Obama running up against John McCain, you had a lot of no, I believe this was 2012 actually. You had on his second term that he was running. A lot of phrases that were repeated up against Obama were a Marxist or socialist failed state, rather, failed democracies, something like this type of phrase. And you didn't really have people thinking that Obama was a socialist, but the efficiency of that argument from the right, the repetition of it was, well, first of all, undeniable. Within the thousands, every right-wing commentator would just repeat this phrase whenever they had their chance, even if the question wasn't relevant to the answer. For example, you had one commentator whose name I'm blanking on now, right-wing commentator, who was asked this question: what is the how do you think Obama is doing with the economy? And she responded something like, this, like, he has caused a failed socialist democracy. And then another question was asked of her, which was, how is he doing this? And she said that he's really helping Wall Street. And then you have this inconsistency, which is, well, which one is it? Is it socialism or is it extreme capitalism where you help Wall Street? And that was the idea there, that she wasn't answering the question. She was instilling an idea. And I think that is a lot of voters. Well, first of all, that has been played out with Brexit. That is just advertising in general. That is the fundamental premise of advertising, is that you instill some belief about something. Coca-Cola, smiling people having fun. Brexit, that Britain is giving too much money to the EU, when in reality they're giving less than Germany, Italy, and a number of other countries. Germany twice as less. Germany giving twice as more. So yeah, the intuition, I think we discount it. We don't think about the monkey mind. I mean, with romantic relationships, you see, you could kind of go on and on with how much we use how much in control the elephant is over our lives, and it's not complete anarchy in the mind, but as I said, there is the writer, and he does prevail at points, but a lot of the times we don't choose these things. We don't choose the thoughts coming in. We don't choose the political decisions. So we should have more empathy and understanding and slow thinking.
I agree with that tremendously. How do we get better at doing that, though? I feel like it's one thing to acknowledge that we should have some more understanding and empathy. How do we begin, though?
Yeah, I think that one of the perspectives is to take for example, the perspective I take in my book, which is reading the opposition. What John Stuart Mill said in the beginning of the interview that I mentioned. If you don't hear the opposition, you don't know your own view. I completely agree with that. Like the in today's society, people find it very difficult to read the opposition. They don't know as a liberal, what the right is saying, and on the right, what the liberals are saying. Oftentimes we're in echo chambers, and social media is just intensifying that. And even within our own circles, we talked about this earlier, once again, with the pure evil argument, the us versus them thinking, boxed in, categorization. And so the number one, I think, way to do it, and the is to read the opposition, and is to befriend people who you disagree with. I mean, I have incredible friends who are very socially conservative Christian people, and I mean, I humanize them. I see the humanness within them. We are humans. We love everyone. Has We have kids, that we adore. You should see the human within all of us, and I think that's the way to do it. In the 1960s, what you had, and a number of researchers look at this, Eric Kaufman and others, you had the isolating of people. Eye-to-eye contact was deteriorating at a steady rate, and you had with that a rise of anti-immigrant speech, a rise of kind of radicalism, extremism. And so I think we need to get back to that. We need to promote thinking that is inclusive. We need to promote hanging out, being with people that we disagree with. It's shocking that that even has to be said, right? Because that seems like such an obvious thing.
The way out of this mess right here, to bring down the polarization, we have to understand each other. We have to talk, communicate, and try our best not to demonize other people for what they think. Now,
Yeah.
do you have anything else you want to wrap up with before we end the conversation today?
No, I think that was that was a really nice way. I
Yeah,
mean, I would like to say how, I think that you're doing an incredible job at this with your interviewing and with the topics you touch on, and you've definitely earned a fan.
okay, thank you, Jacob. It was a pleasure having you. I hope we talk again in the future.
Thank you. Yeah, likewise. I hope to be on, and yeah, I'll definitely benefit from your work. So keep doing it.